Just gonna keep letting people in while I introduce ourselves. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new edition of PR Labs webinars. This is actually not really a webinar. This is more like a Zoom call. We wanted to keep it like very intimate because of our guest today, Ferdinand. Ferdy, welcome.
Hello.
So this is going to be a fireside chat, as the name says it. And the idea is just to have like a nice chat with Ferdinand and basically get to learn from firsthand how he's like nailing it at like 3D hubs and their PR strategy. So what I let people in, Ferdy, maybe you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and who you are.
Yeah, sure. So currently I'm the director of marketing and growth at 3D Hubs. 3D Hubs is an online platform, kind of a marketplace model for manufacturing. So what we do is we connect companies that have manufacturing needs with a network of over 240 suppliers offering various manufacturing technologies, which means that we're in quite a niche field and quite an innovative space. So we offer everything from 3D printing, which is kind of like the new hype in production and manufacturing. Maybe not that new anymore, but still very hyped, all the way down to CNC machining, injection molding, really old school technologies. Before joining 3D Hubs, I worked for a company called Recruity, where I was the CMO, and I basically led marketing and growth, which was a recruitment software. And before that, I was a trainer, the lead trainer at Growth Tribe, which is one of the big marketing training companies based here in Amsterdam. And before that, I worked for agencies. And I tend to look at growth quite holistically. So I work usually on various aspects of marketing, in kind of combining the technical and the creative side. So branding, product growth, and customer acquisition, so performance stuff. And over the last year with 3D Hubs, we kind of found ourselves in a position where we had a leadership that wanted big PR successes. We're in a field where everyone looks up to the Teslas, of the SpaceXs, and the NASAs of this world. So they wanted that kind of PR, but for a company that doesn't have quite the name recognition that Tesla has yet, unfortunately. And we screwed it up for about 6 months before figuring out what works. And that's basically what I'm going to talk about today. Is what we did, kind of borrowing from past successes and kind of building on that to make a system that works at 3D Hubs.
Great. Thanks, Ferdy. And you also have your own podcasts, right?
I do. Yeah, I launched it yesterday.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Anyone has any questions can add me on LinkedIn. You can see everything I do there. I write articles and I talk about stuff very, very occasionally, very sporadically when I have the time and the energy. I share stuff.
Nice. That's nice. And maybe a bit about myself. I'm Matias. I'm the founder of PR Lab, which is a integrated PR agency based in Amsterdam. We work with startups and Scaleups. We help them grow and expand internationally. And I'm the writer of a book called The PR Paradox that I have here with me. That is how to master the art of PR as a startup and scale up. So Ferdy, I'm super excited to have you here. Let's just have our super nice fireside chat. So just a bit of like a background behind the relationship between Ferdy and me. We worked together in the past and we were just catching up a few weeks ago. We just got together for coffee and a walk because in Amsterdam there's still a lockdown going on. So we're just walking and he was just telling me everything about the PR strategy of 3D Hubs, and I'm like, okay, this is super interesting to share with the PR community because we get this question all the time. Like a lot of people think that PR is something that is very B2C, right? It's very for like big corporations and companies doing something sexy and so on. And what I found really interesting about your model, Ferdy, is that you're making it work for like a company that would not be considered that sexy. That is more like in the manufacturing space, let's say like that, right? So you also have like a strong B2B background, I mean, even though you have worked for B2C companies as well. And I don't know. I think we're all here to learn about your experience. So maybe before you tell us exactly about how you do it, maybe you could tell us a bit about why do you see the value in PR as a tool for growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think PR at the end of the day, like the tricky thing with PR is that it means so many things, like everything in marketing, right? Like we love our labels and definitions. So everyone's talking about different things when they're using the same words. But I think a lot of people will look at PR like really big companies as something that's more like, maintaining a certain image. It's a lot of mitigation. work. Whereas when you're a startup and scale up, it's all about getting talked about. You just want to be talked about, right? Whereas when you're in a really big company, you want to be you're already being talked about. You just want to make sure you're being talked about in the right way. Tesla doesn't need to make 100 PR pitches to get picked up. Elon Musk does anything and it gets picked up immediately. So I already think that those are already two very different disciplines. I think they should probably have different names at the end of the day, because what you do in both, when it comes to mitigation and maintaining an image, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. I would never be, that's not what I do. That wouldn't fit in my role anyways. But when it comes to using PR as a channel to gain authority, build brand awareness, and really, to just really like build the perception of your business within a market, I think that's where I kind of get more involved. And that's why I focus mainly on startups and scale-ups when I work on PR efforts. And why is it beneficial? I mean, the thing is, PR is such a multifaceted thing. It really, it's one of the few things that you can do that has an impact across the board, right? It's something that it builds authority for your audience, for your customers, for potential leads, but it also builds authority for investors, for example. It also builds authority for other founders within the market, potential partners. I think if you can refer to a couple of pieces that are relevant, that convey your mission and your vision, and they're featured on either very niche publications that people in your industry care about, or really large publications, so like Forbes or Business Insider. These are the ones we recently got picked up on. Then that's super powerful, right? So I think different companies will have different experiences in whether PR can drive customers. I think that's, and that's also what I'm going to talk about. Like the goals of PR, I think one of the reasons we had kind of a learning curve getting into it was because we weren't super clear on the goals that we had with our PR efforts. And I think that's where you need to start.
Interesting. Just for everyone that is in this call, feel free to make use of the chat feature. And just like, if you have any questions or any comments, please drop them there. I'm gonna pick them up later on and we can ask Ferdy all your questions. That's the benefit of joining the webinar in real time, because a lot of people join later and then they don't have this chance. So make use of it, guys. And let's just turn this into like a really nice intimate chat. So Ferdy, so you were saying that, you guys were at the beginning trying to figure out what your PR goals were, like kind of like trying to understand, okay, what is that we want to do? And how do you go about it? Because you are not let's say, a PR person, right? You're like, your expertise is in marketing, like growth, right? But you're also taking care of PR. So how do you actually, as a person that was not that familiar with the PR world, got into it, basically? How do you learn about it? Do you start using some tools as well? Or it was more like trial and error? Tell us more about your particular story with it.
I've always pushed for, like I said, marketing is such a broad field, and you'll have people who do all kinds of jobs within it. And I've always pushed for a very holistic approach to growth, right? So if it was up to me, I'd put the customer success and sales departments in my department and just run the whole thing. Not necessarily successfully, but that would be kind of, I like to think about things holistically. Growing a business is such a holistic effort. You need really strong alignment. And for me, it just happened that, I guess PR at the end of the day, skill-wise and resource-wise, is so closely aligned with content marketing in a lot of ways and communications. And that was already in my department. So usually when founders said, hey, you know what, we want to up our PR efforts, they basically turned to me and said, hey, figure it out. And that's basically what I do. I'm not I never made my career on the basis of being a super specialized expert in one thing. I can bring a certain kind of technical, commercial, and creative combination. And I just tried to apply that to PR. And with a lot of trial and error, we started finding things that worked. So it's really at 3D Hubs where we started really putting in the effort and the focus, because we started working with agencies, and it was basically founders, management team saying, we want to do PR, we want it to be successful, let's put the resources in it, but no goal definition, no expectation management, no clear overview of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. As a result, we worked with really good agencies and we worked with not so good agencies, but neither of them could really please our management team because our management team wasn't really clear on what they wanted. And we weren't very clear on managing what they wanted. And I think after we decided, okay, Corona hit, resources scaled back a lot. Unfortunately, PR is the kind of thing that gets hit first. So suddenly, you can't afford to take your money out of SEO and SEA as much as you can, taking it out of more kind of like brand and what I would call kind of like the softer side of marketing, which is as important, but in times of crisis, people question it. We scaled it all back, and then when Corona hit, we decided to launch this thing called the COVID Manufacturing Fund. So we realized that there was a need for face shields, there was a need for ventilators, there was a need for things for hospitals around the world who couldn't get access to these materials, and there was news, everything like all over the news. You saw these small kind of ragtag startups and groups forming to kind of create this PPE for hospitals in need. And we realized, well, we're in a super unique position to help facilitate that. We have contacts throughout the industry who might be able to provide funding. We also have contacts throughout the industry who can actually manufacture these things. So we launched this fund. We raised over 35,000 euros, and we created thousands of pieces of PPE for hospitals all around the world, from the UK to Argentina to Kosovo to Croatia. And that became a really big initiative, and it got picked up all over the news. People talked about it a lot. And I just realized kind of we flipped the way we thought about it to, if you want people to talk about you, you need to make sure you're worth talking about. And I think that's rather than taking what we were doing and then just trying to big it up as much as possible so that people write about it, we started flipping how we think about it and really say, okay, if we want people to write about us, well, what are reasons they would write about us? What are reasons they would consider us over a big name? And we started kind of dissecting that and turning that into a strategy. And go into the details later, but that's kind of how we ended up with this PR approach.
So you basically started with a shift in the mindset. Okay, we need to be relevant in order to get the journalists to talk about us. We need to provide them with some newsworthy stuff instead of talking about ourselves all the time, right? Yeah. Before we talk about how the specifics of how you made it happen, how do you go about setting those goals that you mentioned that were not clear?
Yeah, I think it started with what we realized is that, I mean, the stakeholders will very rarely be super heavily involved in this, And the thing with PR, and there are a few things in marketing, I think PR is one of them. I think video marketing is another. There are just some things that everyone can relate to, and that's why they're super powerful. But, everyone has an opinion on it, right? So there are parts of what I do where founders will never get involved. They don't even know we do it, right? As long as the metrics are good at the end of the day, they're not super involved. But there are aspects where you create a video, everyone has an opinion on a video. Everyone looks at a video. It doesn't matter how much or how little you know about it. You go like, that's a good video. That's not a good video. I kind of like this. I didn't like that. PR is a little bit the same. You get picked up by Forbes. Nobody really cares. As long as it's not saying things that are wholly inaccurate about your company, your founders are going to be happy if you're a smaller company, of course. Mm-hmm. So we realized that the thing that was always going to get kudos within the company was kind of big authority mentions. So we started focusing on that. We started focusing on, okay, how do we get the big publications to pick us up? And then as we went on, we started realizing, well, you know what, we needed kind of a two-pronged approach, because we kind of just funneled everything into one strategy and then just kind of hoped. So we'd have, every time we had an announcement, we would write angles, we would pitch it to journalists, and it usually wouldn't get picked up. That's essentially what happened. Like, we have niche publications would pick it up, but broader publications wouldn't. And then with every time we'd pitch a bigger publication, if we actually created value, it often started a conversation, and that conversation could stretch over weeks or even months. And eventually, at some point, one of these publications would say, hey, we're writing a piece about X. Do you guys have a comment to add to it? And that was born out of, I guess there's a difference between proactive and reactive PR, right? There's kind of the reactive, which is, somebody comes to you and you give feedback. My experience is, if you're a startup or scale up, you're usually not going to get into a tier 1 publication. When I say tier 1, I mean the really big publications proactively. You're just not, right? Like, 3D Hubs is an awesome company. I know that to a lot of people, it might not seem sexy, but actually I do think it's quite a sexy business. We do 3D printing. We use AI, two of the biggest technologies of today. And we basically manufacture parts for SpaceX and NASA and Tesla. And we essentially, our motto is that we empower engineers to create revolutionary products, right? So we do have a strong vision that we can push. But despite that, at the end of the day, the really big publications, no one gives a shit about who 3D Hubs is. No one cares who Recruity is. No one cares who most companies are, unless you're really, really big, right? So we just realized that proactive outreach is really important, but you cannot expect a proactive outreach to result in a PR pickup. It can in some cases, but it usually won't. However, if you reach out proactively, regularly, and create value, eventually those journalists who you build relationships with are going to start thinking, well, this is a company that knows about this thing. So this is what we started to realize, kind of not by accident, but kind of, coincidentally. And then we started actually turning that into our process and strategy. So we'd launch things like cross-docking, where, most companies who do what we do, they have factories all over the world. Somebody orders, they drop ship from the factory straight to the company. It leads to customs issues. It leads to quality issues. So we decided to open 2 warehouses in Chicago and Amsterdam and start cross-docking. So basically shipping from suppliers to our warehouse, custom clearance, quality clearance, and then sending it on to our customers, which for the industry was a really big deal. But it's not something that sounds super sexy to Forbes readers. It just doesn't. So we had to find, so we would still pitch it, and we'd find an angle that works, right? We would find an angle that is relevant to Forbes. We would look at which journals should we reach out to. We would look at what do they currently write about, and we would try to angle it, anchor it in there. And 9 out of 10 times they're not even gonna answer, or they're not gonna pick it up. And then maybe 7 out of 10 times they don't answer. But the 3 times they do, you start a conversation. And then down the line, if you are having multiple conversations and creating value over a longer period of time, and I think this is where most companies struggle when they employ an agency, they expect immediate results, and that's not going to happen. It's a long-term game. If you want to have tier 1 publications as a smaller business, as a startup or scale up, you need to work on those relationships, and you need to just create value for them. And then we realized that basically we have 2 very different goals. And I think these are the 2 goals any company trying to do PR should have. And one is authority, like build authority. And that's where you want to get into tier 1 publications. And the second one is build awareness, right? And that's where you want to get into tier 2, tier 3 niche publications, right? So that means business publications in your geographic region, right? It's easier to get onto Silicon Canals than it is to get on Forbes. But it also means niche industry publications where your audience is reading. So things like itsupplychain.com, things like manufacturing.com. These are, 3D printing websites. We know that these are our kind of niche publications where we can build awareness. And we started a strategy that is separate, where basically we split. Niche PR is basically just a distribution channel for content. So we treat it the same way as we would treat social media, the same way that we would treat outreach, the same way that we would treat content ads and distribution. So PR becomes a distribution channel for content and company announcements. That's niche PR. And then big ticket PR is a completely different process where we really pour a lot of effort and time in. And those 2 will overlap regularly. When you have a niche announcement, you will always try and spin it for a big publication to pick it up. But you know that your goal is niche. So I'll give one specific example. We recently added a former VP of supply from Unilever to our board as an external board member. We know that that's not news that Forbes is going to publish. So the most important thing is managing the expectation. And if you do this for a while and you do capture tier 1, your stakeholders are going to start realizing this. They're going to be on board with it. So I think it's really, we already know now when we look at a story where it can get picked up and where it can't. And that makes our goal setting really realistic. So for this announcement, we knew that it's important that niche publications pick it up. That doesn't mean we don't pitch it to the big publications, but we do it as part of a general kind of contact nurturing approach. And then the tools we use, we don't really use many tools. I think for the big ticket PR stuff, you have to do it manual. If you're not building relationships, it doesn't matter. Then for niche PR, we use BuzzStream. BuzzStream is what we use to do automatic follow-ups. So we always pitch before we launch something. We put an embargo on it. Then we send the release, and then we do follow-ups 1, 3, and 8 days later or something like that. But we also try to nurture them over the entire year automatically. So we send them content from us, but also other content. So we'd be like, hey, I know you're writing about, like, it's just like, if you don't seem like you're selling stuff, they're way more open. So we'd write to, if we know that somebody's writing about supply chains in Europe, and we have something to say about it, we'll send them what we have to say about it. If we don't, we might send them something from a totally different publication and say, hey, by the way, this company is doing really cool stuff. Or we'll promote our customers to them. So it's really about building that value, because if they know, like, journalists get 1 million requests a day, but they still want good stuff to write about. And most journalists have like their 5 to 10 people that they go to when they're looking to kind of beef up a story. And if you can become one of those people, but that's something you can't do overnight. You have to build that over time. This was a way long-winded sidetrack, but that's basically the core.
I mean, I just let you go goals, because I'm just like enjoying every second of this. Now, maybe, okay, I know you're an expert at this. I mean, I understand everything you're talking about because I also have my own PR agency, but like, let's just like take like a hard stop into it and try to make it understandable to everybody. How do you structure this, Ferdy? Like, do you have a integrated calendar where you know what is that you're going to push when? How do you know also, okay, these are our target journalists? How do you identify them and how do you start building relationships with them? Because you just mentioned something very important, adding value into it, like from like, you know, having conversations with them. But how do you keep track of who are you building relationships with? And most importantly, what metrics do you use to understand, okay, this is a solid relationship, this is something that we need to work on, etc.?
I'm a big fan of keeping things as simple as possible, and I think here, I mean, at this point, I also want to give a big kind of like shout out to our content and communications manager, Tess Roberts. She runs all of this on the executional side, so I in no way can claim credit for our successes by myself. But what we do is we try to keep it simple. So, like I say, we have building authority, and then we have driving awareness. Those are two different goals. They're treated differently, and they have different projects and different processes. That's the first. So now for building awareness, like I said, we treat PR simply as a distribution channel. And there are two kinds of content that we distribute. Content like that we create, right? And then there's basically announcements. So we launch a new feature, we launch a new service, we have something to announce. That's essentially the two kinds of content that we distribute. And then what we do is when we create our content strategy, we're very clear on we only create like 4 types of content, right? So we create content for SEO. The distribution channel for that is SEO. Then we create thought leadership and authority content. The distribution channel for that is primarily email and nurturing, right? It sometimes overlaps with SEO. And then we create case studies and company updates. And case studies and company updates are almost uniquely distributed through PR, right? That's just how we structured it. And you can argue very easily that that's maybe not the right way to do it. But people often ask, you know, what do I do if I don't have the resources? Well, when you don't have the resources, you do exactly the same that you would do if you do have the resources. You just prioritize more strictly and more aggressively. That's all you can do. So we just say case studies, there's 100 things you can do with a case study, but we just stick it on our website and we distribute it via PR. Why? Because the companies that use us do awesome shit. So next Wednesday, SpaceX is going to launch parts via Space Tango that were created by 3D Hubs. So we're going to probably do a push in niche media, how 3D Hubs is bringing together, I don't know, I haven't even created it, but the angle I would think about is, okay, what's interesting about this? SpaceX, big company, everyone knows them. Space Tango, small startup, not so many people know them. How 3D Hubs brings these companies together to innovate and drive space exploration forward. That's probably a niche thing that we could write. And then we'd write a case study about Space Tango, and we would then push that amongst niche PR. And when I say niche PR, we're not going to push it to Forbes. If we think it's relevant, we might go like just in case. But like I said, the authority is a totally different thing. We treat it differently, and we give it a much more manual approach. So this, we would basically probably load up a few stories. We'd create a blog article. We'd probably create a press release. We'd maybe do 2-3 different angles, depending on what we think actually, you know, really works. And then we'll push that to all of our audience, to all of our journalists who are in the niche sphere, because we know that they know us. They have a need for content more, right? If you are running a website on 3D printing in space, for example, right? You're not drowning in content. So we know that there we can take an automated approach. So we treat it basically as a distribution channel. And there our success metric is basically how many pickups do we get.
Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. The authority is separate, and that's a completely different process that we run.
Right. So you basically divide your efforts in thought leadership and brand awareness, right? And for each one of them, you have separate strategies, separate metrics, and so on. Now, I reckon one of the questions that many people might have at the moment is like, okay, I'm not 3D Hubs, therefore I don't have many news happening. How do you create the news? How do you create that momentum?
Yeah, so this is where kind of the brand authority side of things comes in. And this is basically what everybody wants to hear, right? No one's here because I got us onto itsupplychain.com. Everyone's here because how do I get onto Forbes? How do I get onto Entrepreneur? How do I get onto Business Insider? And here the reality is it starts with building relationships. You need to know who is going to write about you, and you need to be dead strict on it, right? For example, TechCrunch is never going to write about you if you haven't raised funding and haven't acquired another company. Those are the only 2 things they ever write about. right? If you're not a huge company. If you're a small company, they'll write about it any day of the week. X company has raised Series C, X company has acquired X company. So you need to know who writes about what. Then you need to know which journalists are the ones writing about it. And then you need to go a level deeper and say, okay, how do I build relationships with this journalist? So you can start by just pitching them the news that you have, any updates that you have. But what we then do is we take a much more manual approach. So first, we really do our research. So one of my favorite books is really simple. It's this one, right? What does it mean to be customer centric? And basically, the most important thing is don't just know your good customers. No, only focus on them. And the 60% of customers you have who aren't relevant, basically don't cater to them. It's the same thing in PR. We look at the 10 journalists who really create value in the publications that we need, and we will then talk to them. We invite them to our webinars. We send them content. We send them content from other people. We just basically want them to know that we are a source of authority on this subject. That's number one. Number two, we have a very strong vision. So we believe that the distribution of manufacturing is the future. With COVID and climate change, supply chains are being disrupted. If you have one factory and all your eggs in one basket, you're going to be screwed. So you need a distributed network of manufacturers. And that is our vision. And that is the vision. We push that hard and we stay consistent, because that means that when they do write about us, one of our big challenges in the past was we used to be a peer-to-peer B2C 3D printing company. Everyone still called us that. Until 6 months ago, everyone called us a 3D printing company. And we pushed this vision super strongly. Nobody calls us a 3D printing company anymore. They talk about us as an online manufacturing platform, which is what we are, which is how we want to be seen. So we build these strong relationships. We talk to them regularly. Then we do two other things. One, we craft angles. When we launch something, we craft 6 angles, right? And at the end of the day, the reason most people say, oh, this is hard is because they don't want to do the work. But you need to write 6 angles, right? So if we know that, I need to think of it. Like, you can think of crazy stuff you can do. If you know that there's a website in your niche that hasn't been really active for a long time, write to them and ask them, hey, you guys haven't been active. Maybe we could acquire you, right? It doesn't really matter if it's a real acquisition. It's like, hey, can I buy your domain name for like $2,000, right? And then you have an acquisition story. And then suddenly, if you're talking about, I don't know, some kind of update that you're running. Hey, we just rebranded XYZ. Also, we've acquired this company. And, you can acquire a company that can be incredibly expensive, but acquiring a company's domain name doesn't have to be that expensive. And you can pair that together, and suddenly you have an acquisition story on your hands. So basically, we write angles and we create PRable moments. So for example, the COVID Manufacturing Fund, right? That was a PRable moment that we created. And we try to do this regularly. So some industries really love reports and academic papers. We create the 3D printing trend report every year, which gets us 50 plus pickups in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 publications, where basically we take all of the data from our network and we talk about what are the consumer trends, or like the B2B consumption trends in 3D printing. We wrote the supply chain resilience report, how companies are revamping their supply chains in the midst of COVID. We anchor absolutely everything into coronavirus this year. If you don't, you won't get picked up. That's what we found, that if you talk about COVID and you anchor your story in COVID, that works. And we talk about how our industry as a whole, despite being the biggest industry in the world, manufacturing, has struggled. Modern manufacturing companies that use AI and automation have not. And there you need to think about risks. So we write articles where we talk about how online platforms for manufacturing have raised over $560 million this year, whilst the entire industry as a whole has seen a 7% shrink. And that's a story people want to talk about. That's a unique PRable story and moment that we create. So we push that. And then when we have an announcement, we write many angles about it. And we think about how can we anchor this? So it's really about anchoring it in things that the journalists want to write about. And the better you know them and the stronger your relationship, the more likely that is to happen. And even then, 9 out of 10 times, they're not going to pick it up. But when they do write about it, they include you. So when Business Insider announced, they announced the, what's it called? The transforming business, like 100 people in Europe transforming business. Our CEO was named as the #1 person transforming business in manufacturing. This is a businessinsider.com. And that came from the fact that we reached out to them 3 months ago with some story that they weren't interested in. We had a publication on Forbes about how supply chains are being rethought. That came from an announcement we made 6 months ago. And we've been talking to the journalist for 6 months. And he finally decided to write this piece, and we gave our input. And then we pivot off our existing content to get more. So once a Business Insider said our CEO is one of the big names, you use that to get into other publications. So if somebody says, if you know that somebody's writing about, I don't know, 3D printing and space tech, we reach out to them. And because we have the network and the conversations, we hear about these things. And we say, hey, well, our CEO was recently named one of the biggest people in manufacturing in Europe. If you want an exclusive comment on the subject, we can arrange that. And you can then, it's like a ladder, right? Every time you get a big publication, you can build on that to get more.
Amazing. You should write your own book of VR. Hey, Ferdy, one question about what you just mentioned about the reports that you guys make. You also told me a little bit about how you guys collect data through your newsletters. Is that correct?
Yes.
That you said, I think that's something that maybe people could also start using, right?
Yeah, so there are a few hacks. I'm not a fan of hacks. Anyone who's heard me talk, like I hate the word hacks. I hate the word growth hacking, even though it made my career. It's that there are a few kind of like easier things you can do. I think things like rapid responses, using Harrow, help a reporter out to respond to comments. These are kind of things that work. What we found works is giving unique data about industry behavior. And that might not always work on very, very big publications. We're lucky in the sense that 3D printing, artificial intelligence, manufacturing, and industrial growth are topics that Forbes cares about. So we can try and edge that into Forbes. But if you can't, you need to work with the kind of smaller, more local niche publications. And they love data. They love to know what's happening. And I think this is one of our learning. We created this thing called the Supply Chain Resilience Report. It was like 25 pages. It took 3 months to put it together. It was a ton of work. It cost us like $3,000 in terms of like freelancer fees and promotional fees. And it was a really detailed report on how supply chains are evolving. It had a bit of history, a bit of theory. And then at the end, you had a chapter which kind of looks at the data. And what we did is we have a network of manufacturing partners, and we basically looked at in which countries were our manufacturing partners picking up orders, and which ones were they dropping orders. So everyone felt the sting of COVID in March. We felt the sting of COVID in January because our supply in China got completely shut down after Chinese New Year. So we had all this data on how our manufacturing partners had behaved. So we released that as a chapter to say, how companies are diversifying. And of course, you anchor it with your message and your vision, right? Our vision is distributed manufacturing. So we anchor that and say, well, that's what's happening. And then we sent a survey out to all of our customers, and we said, how are you dealing? Basically saying, like, be part of the conversation. That's how we kind of angle it. So we send a newsletter regularly every week or every month, depending. And as one of the sections, we have be part of the conversation. And people like to be part of the conversation. So we'd send them a survey, and in the survey, we'd ask them questions. Now, I'm not going to lie, and I'm not going to advertise this outside of this call, but really, really fundamentally, you can frame questions that they suit what you're trying to say, right? So, for example, we would say, and this is what everyone does, right? It's not just a coincidence that when people publish, and it doesn't mean it's wrong, by the way. So if you really believe in it, but if you have a small sample size, you're not always going to get the answers you want unless you frame the questions right. So it's not UX research, it's PR data gathering. So we would say something like, have you seen your supply chain hit? Like, what has been the biggest, have you had supply chain issues? Yes or no, right? And every company in the world has had supply chain issues. It happens it's like a core thing of having a supply chain is you will have issues with it. So then we have our first data point, 85% of companies have experienced supply chain issues over the last 10 years. And then we would say, okay, what has been the main cause to your supply chain issues? And then we would say stuff like environmental factors, trade wars. We just give multiple choice. Pandemics and external these kind of things would then be options. Next data point, 47% of companies had their supply chain hit by the pandemic. Then comes the next one, which is third question in the survey. What do you think is the best way to deal with this situation? What is the best way to prevent? And you frame the question in a way that it's clear that what you're trying to ask is, what is the best way to prevent disruptions to your supply chain? And one of the answers was diversifying your suppliers, right? Making sure you don't put all of your eggs in one basket. And then suddenly we have 3 data points that we can sell to journalists. We can say 88, I'm making up the numbers, can't remember them by heart, but 85% of companies have experienced supply chain disruption. 67% of them say it was due to COVID. And 87% of those believe that the best way to prevent it is to have a distributed supply chain. Suddenly you have 3 really powerful data points, and you can place, because that's our vision, distributed manufacturing, right? We can actually anchor that in, and we then push that to publications. So we made this whole report that took 3 or 4 months, and we kicked it off. And it turns out that 80% of the report, no one gave a shit about. No one cared about the history, the theory. All they cared about was the data. So now what we do is we just send out surveys about topics that are interesting and current. We gather these answers. And like I said, you can always, multiple choice questions always allow you to shape the conversation, right? If you ask people an open field, what is the biggest disruption to your supply chain? You'll get 100 different answers from 100 different people, right? But if you do a multiple choice question, and build it accurately. I'm not a fan of bullshitting. I'm not a fan of saying inaccurate things. So make sure that it reflects what you truly believe are the factors. You can gather data, and that data you can pitch to journalists. It's super easy to do. But yeah, we benefit from the fact that despite being a B2B company, we have over 55,000 contacts. So this doesn't work if you have 10 customers. But then if not, build a community, build an online community, build a group, build up a newsletter following. There's lots of things you can do there. Just gather that data. And that data is super easy to pitch to journalists. And journalists love data. That's all they want to hear about.
And something to add to that, you can also use tools for data collection, like Pollfish, for example. It's like €1,000, and then you get a lot of responses. Interesting. This is super interesting, Ferdy. Do we have any questions from the audience? I see a lot of people writing stuff, so I like that. It's very insightful, and that's why I always enjoy joining your sessions, Ferdy. So you're super transparent, and you just share everything you do. I think we need more of that. So I'm checking now the chat box. How do you present the metrics? How do you present the metrics in board meetings? What business metrics and leading indicators do you use? Interesting. This is more related to metrics. Do you have any? I think we talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, we keep it quite simple with PR, right? I think we treat PR as an end, not a means to an end. So it's a strategic decision. I think that makes it easier. I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but what I said to the company was that, look, if you want to do PR, then the end should be PR. Of course, there are benefits to PR, right? It's going to build your brand authority. It's going to be a conversion assistant. There are many impacts of it. But for the authority PR, the goal is just publications. And everyone agreed on that. So what we did is we created a list. We created 3 tiers. And we created rules for what each tier is. I can try and template that and share it with you later. Where we basically say, has to have this many views, has to have this kind of niche. Essentially, we just created a list that everyone agreed on. So we said the tier 1 publication has this many views, is a more general audience, blah, 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 blah. And then we just measure how many publications we get per year, per quarter, per month. That's the metrics we share. And then for distribution, we look at how many people actually visit the piece of content.
And one last question for me is, do you integrate these PR results along the funnel? Let's say, for example, do you use articles to nurture leads, for example, or to start conversation with prospects or with investors, or not really?
Yeah, it's tough. We know, and this is where I think prioritization is so important, because there's so much shit out there. Everyone will tell you, ooh, this content strategy and this inbound process. The reality for 3D Hubs is our biggest potential. If we want to use content to drive leads, we should just do SEO. That's what we should do. We just know it. Manufacturing is one of the most complex industries. Engineering is a complex industry. So if you write about how do you anodize a metal part for this kind of that's shit people Google. That's how you're going to get people, right? So we know that if we really want to generate leads, PR is never going to generate the kind of leads that we want. And if it does, we're never going to be able to measure it in a tangible enough way to justify it, because we need to probably 100x our SEO efforts before we can justify tapping into some of the softer channels. I think that's the biggest mistake that I've made as a marketer and other marketers make, is they just want to do everything at once. If you have one thing that works 10 times better than everything else, do that until it's only 1 times better than everything else. Then you can focus on the other stuff. So the reality is that for 3D Hubs, that's why we treat PR as an end, because we see inherent strategic value in the brand authority created. This is why you don't have to get too hung up on metrics all the time. If you're doing PR to acquire customers, I'm sure it's useful, I'm sure it's an impact, but most of the time, that's not how we see it. We see PR as a way to build brand authority. And we will, every 3 to 6 to 12 months, assess what impact that has had across the funnel. But if you're a B2B company where your conversion cycles are 12 weeks and then your closing cycles are 2 months, you're never, and you have a lot of customers in Europe, you are never going to have the data attribution to prove that PR is driving revenue that directly. It's never going to happen. It's not, in B2B, that's not how it happens. It's not that somebody reads an article and, like we sell manufacturing. Manufacturing is not like, it's not cat videos on Facebook. It's not an impulse buy. It's not like somebody like, oh, I'm going to buy 300K worth of prototypes. That's not how it happens. It's like there's a need, there's a decision, and we need to be there when that decision happens. So PR is not really we're not going to drive someone from a Forbes article to manufacturing, but through various things, we know that by staying top of mind, when they have to make that decision, when the intent and the context is there, we want to be the company they shortlist. Because we always say people go through the same process of making decisions. They have the problem, they need a solution, they research up options, they shortlist options, then they compare, then they decide. This is a standard B2B flow for decision making on a customer side. So when they shortlist options, if you make that shortlist, your chance of being, the chances of you actually acquiring that customer are 10x if you don't make that shortlist. If you don't make that shortlist, you're out, right? So to make that shortlist, we do 2 things: display advertising and PR. Well, and content marketing, 3 things. And we see that as a conversion assist, because if we want to drive leads and customers directly, we have better channels for that. So in a B2B context, I would say PR should be a strategic decision. By the way, we spend less than $500 a month on PR. So it's nothing, right? It's really, really nothing. We don't spend anything. The maximum we'll do is maybe pay a freelancer to write a thing. But even now, with the data approaches we take and stuff, we don't need it. So for us, it's a strategic decision. We know that by building authority and being top of mind for many people in the industry through a combination of display ads, content marketing, and PR, we increase the impact on all of our other conversions across the funnel. But you will never tangibly one-to-one be able to measure that. What we do measure over time is how many customers we acquire through direct and branded search. So direct traffic to our website, people who write 3dhubs.com in their browser, and people who search 3D Hubs on Google, because you will not see that in a 2-week frame, but over 3, 6, 9 months, you see that increase if you're building up your brand efforts. So that's our kind of North Star metric for whether PR and all of our branded efforts are working.
So in a nutshell, basically, for you guys, PR works well for like building credibility, for being visible, for like, helping in the decision-making process, because you're more visible in front of like, prospects. But for lead generation, is not the go-to tool. Good to know. Yap asked a question: how many hours a month is spent on PR? Good question, Yap. I think, and that's exactly what I was thinking when you were talking about this, because it's a very complex model. I'm sure you guys have spent a lot of hours into this, right?
Well, we use a lot of automation. So we use BuzzStream to automate, and we work on a quarterly basis, right? So I would say, yeah, we have one person probably spending 15 hours a week on it, 10, 15 hours a week.
It's like a part-time job.
Well, it's part of our content and PR. We have content and PR is combined into one strategy, and then SEO content is part of our SEO strategy. So that's owned separately.
Perfect. Cool. Awesome, Ferdy. Well, I think we are running out of time, and we touched upon a lot of different topics. So I feel like I still need to process all the things that we have discussed just now. It's very heavy, but I really like it. I think it's very insightful. Do you have any last piece of advice for all the startups here that like startup founders or people doing marketing those startups that want to get more visible in front of the media and just join your session? Any last words?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I know there's a couple of questions we didn't touch upon. Feel free to message me them on LinkedIn. I'll happily answer them. Look, it's really simple. Marketing is not that difficult if you know who your customer is. And marketing is incredibly difficult if you don't know who your customer is. That's really what it's down to. And PR is just a process of knowing who your journalist is. It's exactly the same thing, right? So it's know who they are, but not just like, oh, he's John, he's 24 and he likes Snickers. That's not knowing your customer, right? Know why they want, what drives them. I would look into a thing called the jobs to be done 4 forces analysis. What drives people towards new solutions and pulls them away from new solutions. 4 forces. I think that's one of the most useful things I've read and learned over the last years. And just know who you're catering to. And and just know, in B2B, honestly, every company could probably 2x what they're doing if they just invested all their efforts into SEO. If everyone does it, it doesn't work. But people live under this thing that like SEO doesn't work. It's like SEO works. It works really, really well. It's just difficult. You just need to have experts. So
it takes time. Yeah,
people sink 20K a month into Google Ads, but then they don't do any SEO. It's like it costs you 10K a month to get a basic SEO strategy. So if you want to do PR, like know who you're targeting and have really clear goals and ask yourself why you're doing something. I think that's really the key. If you're a startup in a super niche B2B market and you're doing PR to drive leads, that might work, but be aware that it might be really hard to track. It might be really hard to justify results. It might be really hard to see results in the short term. So ask yourself why you're doing it. And I think you want to use data. I'm a big fan of being data driven, but you also have to think strategically sometimes, right? Some of the best marketing campaigns in the world probably would not have gone through if it had been just a data-driven decision, because your data is also based on the past, not on the future, right?
Perfect. Awesome, Ferdy. People seem to be very happy with your insights in the chat. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I think as a recap of what we discussed, is focus on building relationships. The one-shot approach instead of mass distributing. Pick your top journalists. Try to start building a relationship with them, and understand what is your goal behind doing PR. And know that you should have different goals with different tactics applied to each of them in order to make the right noise. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We will share the recording. Ferdy, if you have some things that you would like to share with the audience, please do so, like templates, etc. Please connect with Ferdy on LinkedIn. He's an amazing, as you can see, he's an amazing marketeer, full of knowledge, full of wisdom. So connect with him and let's stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Risky
you, Ferdy.
business letting me go rogue, Matias. Risky.
Cheers, guys. Thank you. I will